Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be having a look at one of Chopin's preludes from his Opus 28 collection. It's Prelude number 6 in B minor. And in particular, we're going to be thinking about how Chopin really makes a left-hand melody sing so beautifully and how he writes it in such a way that it works. Many pieces of music have a melody at the top of the texture, particularly piano pieces, but there's so much good music with melodies elsewhere in the middle of the texture or at the bottom of the texture. So we're going to have a little think about how Chopin goes about writing this melody in the left hand, what he does in the right hand to accompany it, and how it works so well. But first of all, let's begin with the music. And so on. It's a very well-known prelude, so if you've come across it before, that's great. If you haven't, really doesn't matter at all. I always think the left hand of this prelude sounds more like a kind of cello melody than it does a piano piece. It works really well on the piano. Most of Chopin's music was written for the piano, but he did write lots of good cello pieces as well. And you can really imagine this being played on the cello, can't you? Sort of in the middle of that register where it really sings. So it's an absolutely gorgeous melody, isn't it? But let's have a little think about how Chopin has gone about writing this. Well, the first thing we notice in the first line of music here is that we have a 2-bar phrase followed by another 2-bar phrase. Is there anything in common between those two phrases? Well, have a look at the rhythm for one thing. The rhythm is absolutely identical. Are the notes the same? No, not quite. We'll come to that. Does it have a shape? It sure does. It kind of starts here, it goes up in the middle, and it comes down again. And that arch is expanded in the next phrase. The range is just slightly bigger. So that's an interesting way of writing it, isn't it? Okay, how does Chopin actually go about achieving this? Good melodies often have an appropriate balance between conjunct and disjunct movement. Conjunct, notes next door to each other, disjunct, leaps. When you're leaping, you're often leaping from one note of a chord to another note of the same chord until the harmony moves on to a new chord. And when you're going by step, you're often using inessential notes or non-chord tones, passing notes, passing tones, auxiliary notes, neighbour tones. So what is Chopin doing in the first half of his first phrase? Let's just look at the totality of this first bar. Well, the left-hand melody begins with a little arpeggio of B minor. B minor is the home key, so a chord of B minor is the tonic chord, chord 1. So this is what he's doing, he's spelling out that tonic chord. And then he has this, which is a lower auxiliary note or a lower neighbour tone before he comes back to the D again. In the next bar, we're back to B minor tonic chord. So B belongs to it, then it goes down to F sharp that belongs to that chord, D that belongs to that chord, and ends with a C sharp, which is a passing note or a passing tone, onto the B that begins the following bar. Harmonically then, you notice that we're in a very static position, aren't we? Because the first 2 bars, the first 2 measures, are entirely about a tonic chord in B minor, a B minor chord. So the left hand essentially spelling out that chord to rise up to the middle of the phrase, using a little bit of conjunct movement in the middle of the phrase with that lower auxiliary, that lower neighbor tone, and then coming down the arpeggio of B minor at the end of the phrase. So it's got a real arch shape to it. Conversely, in the right hand, we've got a huge amount of stability. I mean, how many people would think that at the top of the right hand, it'd be a really good idea just to write loads of Bs? Doesn't seem terribly exciting, does it? But in a way, Chopin's made it as unexciting as possible in order to keep the listener's attention on the left hand. What else is going on in the right hand? Well, we've just got notes going on in the middle here that are filling out the harmony. So we're kind of hearing this B minor tonic chord. But because the chords are kind of, the harmonic rhythm is static, we're not going anywhere, we're just using that tonic chord for quite a long time. There's nothing else to hear but the stability of the right hand accompanying it with those repeated Bs. That's just chugging along, keeping the quaver movement, the eighth note movement going. We're hearing the middle of the texture, which is again hidden. It's concealed, isn't it, from what we're hearing, just filling out the harmony. All the focus is on the left hand. So there we are. That's how the first two bars, the first two measures work. Now, what does he do in the third and the fourth bars, the third and fourth measures? Exactly the same idea again. We're spelling out this tonic chord of B minor. We're using a lower auxiliary note or a lower neighbor tone, and then we're coming back to the F sharp, and then we're coming down the arpeggio. So it's exactly the same as it was before. But there's a little expansion, because you notice that what Chopin does at the beginning of bar 1 is to go straight up the arpeggio. B, D, F sharp, B, D. When he comes back in the third bar, he puts down the B, misses out the D, jumps straight to the F sharp, and then carries on climbing the chord. So you hear the progression. That's the first bar. That's the third bar. Now, they're both marked with a crescendo, which is kind of taking us to the peak, which is good. Arguably in performance, you might want this crescendo to be very slightly bigger than this crescendo, because we're stretched from D up to the F sharp at the top. So we feel a little more tension about that than we did here. So it would be incredibly boring if he just repeated exactly the same thing twice. But because we have this little variation, literally just missing out a D between the first two notes here, he can stretch it so it's a third higher than it was the first time. And then he can come down the B minor arpeggio in order to move on. So that's so skillfully written. Have a listen to that first line in the light of all this. So it makes it kind of feel more elevated in the third and the fourth bars, third and fourth measures, but it's all still recognizable as the same thing. And what you now realize, of course, is that all the way to the first line, all we've heard is the tonic chord. We just heard a B minor chord. And as the left hand is elevated in that second pair of bars, the second pair of measures, so the right hand has also gone up a third and kind of realigned its harmony to not make sure it doesn't get in the way of the left hand melody, and it just gives us a slight variation in the colour of it. So when we come to the second line, we won't be surprised to think, oh, actually he's doing the same kind of thing again. This time we're going up another arpeggio. But for the first time, the harmony has changed, because when you're in this bar, we've got G major harmony, which is chord 6 in B minor. So having had 4 measures, 4 bars, all the same chord, this chord 6 feels like a real kind of light changing moment after the last 2 bars of the first line. all this B minor we've had from the beginning, and then change. You really feel something else has happened, and we've gone from a minor chord to a major chord, so we feel that light coming on there, don't we? But just the change of harmony. And then we think, I know what he's going to do. He's going to now go as he did before. But Chopin is wise enough to say, no, don't do it this time, because that's what everybody's expecting. So this time we go up here, and G is the highest peak so far. You notice our peak here was D, our peak here was F sharp, now our peak is G. But now we don't get this dotted rhythm. We just carry on in plain crotchets, plain quarter notes. And it becomes more singable. So the rhythm becomes slightly less important here, doesn't it? And here's Chopin this time. Instead of climbing to the peak and then coming down the arpeggio, climbs to the biggest peak so far and then sort of hangs around there. He's coming down by step, repeating notes coming down by step, but he's kind of holding his position higher in the range. And while the rhythm is maybe less exciting here than it was before, the harmony starts to change, because when we look in this bar, suddenly things are happening. We've finished with at the beginning of that line, we started with that G major chord, that chord 6. And then you could say this is a B minor again. But then this beautiful chord is a 2/7 in its last inversion in F sharp minor, going to a 5/7 in first inversion in F sharp minor. So there's something really intimate about the spacing of those chords. Those seconds there, it's very intimate texture, isn't it? Keeps the tension kind of reasonably high. And now the harmony is really moving. The harmonic rhythm is really speeding up. And then it moves again, because now he goes to a diminished 7th in B minor. So in fact, we're not really going to F sharp minor at all after all of that. We're going to a diminished 7th in B minor. Then we get all these passing notes, which happen to give us a G major chord again. Then the beginning of the next bar, the third measure of the second line, diminished 7th again. Now the left hand's a bit busier. We've got this acciaccatura, and then we're back to the diminished 7th, and then a 5 in first inversion, and then a tonic chord, but we've got an accented passing note in the right hand, and then we've got the acciaccatura in the right hand as we go on to a chord 1 in first inversion, then a diminished 7th and another diminished 7th before we go 1 in second inversion to 5. So classic cadential 6/4. Now, what's been going on here? We haven't just had 2 bars and 2 bars. We've now got a longer phrase in the left hand. It's a really long phrase. And just for a moment there, you think, is that left hand still providing the primary melody? It feels as if it started doing that, and then it's kind of evolved into a kind of bass line. Well, you're absolutely right, because if we look at the right hand at this point, something much more melodic is happening in the right hand. It's the only time in this whole prelude that the right hand maybe assumes some prime melodic purpose. The rest of the time, it's just chugging along, repeating those quavers, those eighth notes, filling out some harmony. But when you go from here in the right hand, you suddenly think, oh yeah, this is a really singing melody. And I love the way that the melody is kind of so established in the left hand, keeps going in the left hand, and sort of keeps going in the left hand, but the right hand suddenly kind of sort of takes over. So if I play from the beginning of the second line, you can hear how that works. And then we go back into the left hand. And I love the way Chopin just has these two little notes to connect the end of the second line with going to the third line. When you come to the third line, you think, we're back with something familiar, because what do you notice? Well, all of this is sort of pretty similar to this, isn't it? It's not exactly the same. I mean, this B there is not the C sharp that we had there, but otherwise it's the same, isn't it? And then instead of repeating that sort of two-bar thing in a kind of slightly elevated way, he goes straight on to this idea where we use that chord 6 again. But this time he says, well, it's chord 6 in B minor, that G major chord, but I'm also going to treat it as a chord 5 in C major, because when I introduce the F natural there, we're going to move into C major. So we've got much more harmonic color coming through now, haven't we? But we've got our left hand melody singing away. But because it's not exactly the same as it was before, it's familiar, we've heard it before, but it's been slightly reorganized, we get this. Now we're in C major, so isn't that lovely? And then he hangs around in C major while we do this arpeggio thing in the left hand. And then we're thinking, why are we hanging around with a C major chord? Well, what's interesting about it is he then goes on to this, and then you're thinking, oh, that's a bit of a shock. Diminished seventh in B minor. How do we suddenly get there from C major, if you don't mind? Well, how about this? It modulates to C major, and then we hang around in C major for kind of 3 bars, 3 measures. But of course, the chord of C major is a Neapolitan chord in B minor. It's the Neapolitan 6 of B minor. So when you take chord 2 and you flatten the root, so it becomes a major chord on flat 2, there's your Neapolitan. So it's a very clever way of modulating to C major, but then saying the tonic chord of C major is the Neapolitan in the key of B minor. What I'm trying to say here is, here's Chopin writing this beautiful left-hand melody. It's absolutely absorbing and wonderfully cello-like and cantabile, but you've also got the way that everything else is working. How does the right hand interact with it from time to time, especially that bit at the end of line 2? And how does the harmony go from this static place to something that's more mobile, more colourful? And how do all these things kind of combine with the left-hand melody to make the piece work? Because if you just said, here's a piece with a left-hand melody and everything else is just kind of boring, well, the net result is you've got a boring piece. But he's kind of using this left-hand melody in conjunction with other things like the harmonic tension, like the differences in structure between that and this and so on, really to make it work. And then there's fantastic use of the Neapolitan chord. And then from here, he's got his diminished seventh, back to chord 1, and then a sort of 2-7 in first inversion, back to the diminished seventh, back to this 6th thing, and then a 4-3 suspension at the top, a dominant 7th he thinks is going to go to the tonic chord, but he uses it as an interrupted cadence with these kind of suspended notes. And we think, G major, what a place of bliss. But actually, of course, it's chord 6 in B minor. But you see how the left hand is, meanwhile, doing all this stuff, very cello-like, then repeating it again, and this time going on. So the idea is being extended to take us into this interrupted cadence. And then for the next bit, what do we get? Is we get this 6 again, and then there's 2-7 first inversion again. So we're going round the same territory, but now we've got a B minor chord there, 2-7 in first inversion, diminished 7th again, chord 6, and he's doing all this stuff again with a 4-3 suspension, but this time instead of interrupting the cadence, he says, let's go to a tonic chord. Relief. That B minor and this lovely low bass line. And he could finish there, but he doesn't. He has an A natural. It's a beautiful note, that, in the melody. So something a little bit melodic happening in the right hand again. Before the left hand comes back and reminds us of what we did at the beginning. The same rhythm, the same arch shape, the same B minor static chord, and then rest, and then sticking with the same static chord to take us to the end. It's an absolutely gorgeous prelude, isn't it? And it gives us an insight into what Chopin was thinking and how he went about doing that and writing that melody in the left hand. And also gives composers ideas about, okay, if I want to write a melody in the left hand, how can I do that in the most effective way? And how do I think about other things that are going on around it? What's happening in the right hand? What's providing the harmony? What's the harmonic rhythm? How am I organizing things structurally? How many ideas have I got going in this melody? How do they evolve? How do they develop? It's all here in a nutshell in this sixth prelude of the Opus 28 collection of Chopin. So I hope you found that composer insight something useful, whether you're coming to this as a performer, maybe a pianist playing this piece, or coming to it as a composer thinking, how do you go about writing a melody in the left hand? Well, if you found this video helpful, let me invite you to have a look at the Music Matters website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. Lots of things on there, courses, our Maestros groups and all the rest of it. But you might also be interested in clicking on our merch page. So if you want to buy a musical coffee cup or a music bag or a hoodie, or you're looking for a musical gift for a friend, well, have a look, see, we've got things like that and more besides. So just click on the merch on the homepage there and you will discover all sorts of things that may be of great interest to you. Whether it's merch or whether it's anything else, it's all there. www.mmcourses.co.uk.